We are live now. This is Progress Report. Thank everyone for doing this sort of last minute. I'm here with Brian Anderson, and it is a last minute conversation because this is a crazy situation, and it keeps changing. And I got emails this morning about what's going on, and now there's like two court decisions in the last 24 hours, or 12 hours, or 8 hours. I don't even know. So Brian Anderson writes Anderson Alerts. He is a journalist based in North Carolina, and he is covering the hell out of the North Carolina Supreme Court election, which is still ongoing. It's been like, I don't know, like 6 months or 5, 6 months since election day, and yet they still have a winner there. And I gotta admit, I've been following it this whole time, but eyes were starting to cross a little bit about all the different like numbers and two different courts that was going on: appeals court, state supreme court, federal court. And so I was starting to get, I don't say confused, but turned around. But then I found Brian's coverage, and it's been really great. And he's kept everyone up to date. And I figured, instead of me just trying to re-explain or summarize his coverage, why don't I just bring him on to the newsletter to talk about it and give everyone the answer straight from the horse's mouth himself. So Brian, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. And if you've been keeping track of it this whole time, my thoughts and prayers to you and anybody else. It's been a journey.
It really has. It's been sort of amazing to watch this, like, just this ongoing process. I get my questions of this ongoing process of like, all right, it was a close election. Allison Riggs, who was she's a sitting justice, a Democrat, one of two Democrats on the state Supreme Court, won by 734 votes. But so there's recounts. There was two recounts, I believe. She maintained her victory, and the Republican challenger Jefferson Griffin, not still not satisfied. So he's been filing lawsuits, knowing that I think the courts probably are more in favor of him than not. So um, why don't we just start from the beginning, because this is like a long process, and you can tell better than me. So we know Alison Riggs won. She won. They did the recounts, and then what happens then?
So essentially, there's election day, and Riggs is down by several thousand votes. And after election day, as folks might know, you count votes that arrive from mail-in voters, from overseas voters, people who cast provisional ballots, people who needed to cure their ballots in some way. And after that process, about several days after the election, Riggs overtakes Griffin. And this catches Republicans by surprise, especially the state Republican Party. They had been expecting Griffin to lead. And so now they're very much frustrated, caught off guard. And that is sort of this impetus for this lawsuit that happens. And after these first and second recounts, as you said, Allison Riggs is winning by 734 votes. Griffin sues over three categories of protests. And there's one category for people who had either a missing driver's license or social security number on their registration form. There's people from military overseas. There's people who are called never residents. And so to fast forward to where we are, the Court of Appeals said basically we will accept all of Griffin's protests. The state Supreme Court, which is a conservative majority, that court said hold the horses on some things. These incomplete registrants, their vote should count. That was the attention grabbing 60,000 people
Right.
out of these 66,000 that Griffin had challenged. And now we're left with 6,000 or so people max, and a minimum of about 1,654, I think, is the minimum
Okay.
who are still in limbo. So the question becomes, are we talking about 1,600 or are we talking about 5,000? And that is what is going to make or break the outcome of this race. And what's going to happen? We need a court to weigh in, and this might even work its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll have to see.
Like they are not busy enough. Maybe no one has to listen to them anymore. So who knows if they'll even have to decide on it. But so it's interesting. So Griffin challenged these 65,000 votes. There's 5,000 something that, like you said, maybe a maximum of 5,600 that could be challenged. And so the question is, why these votes? You mentioned overseas voters, military, the people who they say never lived in North Carolina, which we'll get to because that's dicey. And then there's people who, from what I understand, the voter ID laws in North Carolina have changed, and so people who registered to vote at one point didn't have to show a certain ID and so he's, I guess, alleging fraud or something like that. So, what is the technicality that he was trying to get in on?
So essentially, in 2011, there was a law, very uncontroversial. Lawmakers unanimously passed it in the legislature, which had Republican control at that time. And the law essentially said, these military overseas people uh, deserve to be able to vote in these state elections under. It was trying to create some uniformity between just clarifying, these people who can vote in federal races can absolutely vote in state level races
Okay.
too. It was basically just pretty routine clarification. And fast forward years later, Republicans put this ballot measure on, and voters overwhelmingly support it for photo ID. Uh, but it gets challenged in courts, and ultimately, in the end, it ends up kind of taking effect for this 2024 election after a lot of litigation. And where we are in this moment is there's a question of how are we going to implement this photo ID law? And so the state board of elections said, we should give these military overseas people some wiggle room. They shouldn't have to show a photo ID if they're in the military. We know that they're legit. We also shouldn't have these photo ID requirements for overseas people, because how are they going to scan something, print something, include it with There's just some logistical hurdles, and this went through the Rules Review Commission, which is Republican controlled, without any issue in 2024. And the state board of when Griffin protests over this category, the state board of elections in December unanimously says, this was the law that we implemented. This was the administrative rule. It's got to stay in place. And so what Griffin is effectively saying is, the Republican controlled legislature, the Republican controlled Rules Review Commission, the state board of elections, they were all wrong, and this law that is the law of the land at the time of the election was improper, because we have a photo ID law in place, and it should apply to everybody regardless of their voting method or background. And so what the courts have said essentially is, we have a photo ID law in North Carolina. That law should have been applied in a different way. And so now these voters, through no fault of their own, who were explicitly told that you are not required to show a photo ID, now are going to learn that there is a challenge to their ballot through nothing they did wrong and were following the rules in place at the time of the election.
It sounds. How do you? I mean, legally, it sounds very partisan, right? Like there were these rules that, I mean, the state may be screwed up, but then all these voters are going to end up screwed out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've covered campaigns and elections in North Carolina. There's a Republican Supreme Court Justice, Richard Dietz. He boasted all the time on the campaign trail in 2022 how he's never dissented when he was a Court of Appeals judge. He tries to bring consensus, and it is a very rare and stunning rebuke when you have Richard Dietz criticize his own colleagues, effectively saying, maybe Griffin has a point. Maybe this photo ID law should be implemented differently. Maybe these people should be verified in some additional way, but this is not the right way of going about it. Maybe you can apply something for the 2026 election, but to retroactively apply a law to these voters, that's a bridge too far. His colleagues felt differently, but that just speaks to the point that, this is a very unique case, and this isn't just a straight Republican Democrat issue. This is something that has really seen bipartisan pushback.
So, who are these justices that said no? Actually, the rules have to be different afterwards, after the fact.
So the North Carolina Court of Appeals was the one that took Griffin's argument, and the state Supreme Court supported that. And
Okay.
so the Court of Appeals judges are John Tyson and Fred Gore. Gore, I think he's a military veteran. I can't remember the branch, but he is someone who had served in the military as well. And then the Republican justices, you have Chief Justice Paul Newby, you have Tamara Berenger, Phil Berger Jr., and Trey Allen. Those were the six Republicans who have effectively sided with Griffin.
Right. And so, from what I understand, the votes that he challenged, when it was up to 65,000, they were probably, it was convenient who they chose to challenge to some degree, right? There was probably a partisan element to that as well.
Yeah, so it basically what the Griffin campaign did was they prioritized. Some might say targeted. They prioritized at least these Democratic heavy counties, these blue areas. They basically were taking the position that there's a lot of problems in places, but we should go after the places that have the highest populations because that's where the most votes are going to be in question. Coincidentally, those happen to just be uh, Democratic dominated districts and counties. And so Griffin had made requests of other counties. And he would say, I reached out to lots of counties and I got few timely responses. And so I tried my best to file protests in all these counties, but very few of them got back to me. And so where we ended up is four counties: Buncombe, Durham, Forsyth, Guilford. That includes, cities of Asheville, Winston-Salem, Greensboro for folks. That is where these voters are really largely now hanging in the balance. And so what we see is, by all accounts, if this protest is successful, Riggs is going to lose votes. Will she lose 734? That's the open question.
So right now we've got there was some they wanted to stay, right? Riggs and Democrats wanted to stay of the court decision that didn't happen today. And so you have along a little Judd Legum also have been looking at who these people are. They said they're called never residents, right? So there's military people, right? There's people who are, I guess, locals who didn't have their IDs, what have you, and then there's people who they say never lived in North Carolina. They got what you call it? They got their votes. Yeah, Anna. There is no stay in the Fourth Circuit. Who knows what's going to happen yet? But yeah, there's been no stay. The judge said no today. So let's talk about these categories one by one. Let's talk about the never residents. You have found uh, lots of them who actually are residents or previous residents are still registered. And how did that? How did they find these people to challenge them? And why was it like that you were able to like just easily, not easily, you did a lot of work, but find these people to be like actually no, these are North Carolinians.
Yeah, it was hiding in plain sight. I had a public records request I made of the State Board of Elections back in January and said, hey, give me the list of people that Griffin has challenged. Because right now there's not an easy spreadsheet, it's not easily
Right.
digestible. And so I got that list. And the thought at the time was, the biggest attention goes to the biggest group of voters who are these incomplete registrants. That is 60,273 of these 66,000 people. That is what gets the national eyeballs, what gets the most attention. And that is also happens to be Griffin's most far fetched legal argument. So I didn't really pay as much attention to that group.
Okay.
The military overseas folks, that's who I really thought it would come down to. And the never residents, they are 260 people. Griffin trails by 734 votes. So that's not an outcome determinative group. So just based on that fact, this is kind of the category of protest that is most ignored, that people aren't paying attention to, that I had frankly not really dug deep into for months. But then we get this ruling from the Supreme Court that says these voters, these quote unquote never residents, they will not have any due process. Their votes are to be immediately discarded, whereas these military overseas people will be given a 30-day window. And so the fact that these people don't get a chance to show who they say they are, that made me go through that list. And
Yeah.
I looked at like 3 in the morning this past Saturday, combing through every single one. And there was this UNC Greensboro professor who taught for 30 years at this university, has voted in person on election day 8 times. How on earth is that person a never resident? Like my stomach, I almost threw up when I saw that.
So you're just googling these people's names and found.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
their list is in a database. I Google them, find out who they are, and then I say, I'm going the same day to Greensboro to try and talk to these people.
Wow.
And I didn't get a hold of that professor, but I did confirm with his next door neighbor that they just had dinner recently.
Yeah.
And so it's just a mess of a process. But when you talk to these people, a lot of folks are just confused is the initial reaction. I'm the
Yeah.
first one to tell them that their vote's at risk. And then it transitions to anger, frustration, sadness, and frankly, for some of these people, helplessness because they can't do anything. And
Yeah.
where we are now is we're waiting on the North Carolina Court of Appeals to give the State Board of Elections some directive so the state board can inform these people, give them a chance to cure their ballots. But for these never residents, they don't get that opportunity.
And so even though you found, and along with Joe Biden, has found additional ones, these people who are North Carolinians, some of them live there decades. Some people are, maybe they have lived there for a long time. They're just voting absentee for one reason or another. You've confirmed that they live in North Carolina or that they are North Carolinians, and still there's nothing, no due process, nothing that can be done. That just their votes are thrown out.
Yeah, I mean, I found 16 people after doing some more in-depth reporting, 16 out of these 260 that are these never residents have lived in North Carolina, were born in North Carolina, still live in North Carolina, or some combination of the three. And then in partnership with Popular Information, we were able to find it was at least 29. And that number is likely very understated and can only
Yeah,
increase. But as things stand right now, that's more than 1 in 10 people in this protest category who just a few reporters can do a simple Google search and find answers, and the fact that this was missed by so many people, by judges, by party leaders, by lawyers whose job every day it is to
yeah,
live and breathe this case. It's just frankly shocking. And so the response from Democrats has been, oh shoot, we need to sue over this. And so the
yeah.
state Democratic Party and some left wing advocacy groups, some voters affected have sued, trying to get the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals to put a stop to this. And so that is where things stand right now.
How did these people get on that list? If they're North Carolina residents, who put them on a never resident list?
Yes. So I'm trying to find the exact, there we go. There's the federal postcard application that goes to these military and overseas voters. That's just who I'm talking about here.
Mhm.
These are military and overseas people who didn't provide a photo ID because they were explicitly told they didn't have to.
Right, right, yeah.
And there's a box on that form that says, I'm quoting here, I am a US citizen living outside the country. I have never lived in the United States. So that is where Griffin got this never resident from. But there are people who may have checked a wrong box. It's possible there were some processing errors or elections
Sure.
officials input the wrong thing. It's also possible, some of these people are very much never residents.
Mm.
So essentially, what happened was voters filled out a form, possibly incorrectly, or it was implemented incorrectly and logged incorrectly. And now, because of that, Griffin was able to say, hey, these people said to the state elections board they haven't lived here. And so they're never residents, they need to be kicked off. But what's what's interesting, I have to take this rabbit hole,
Yeah.
is there were initially 267 people in this protest category. I narrowed it down to 260 because Griffin apparently had accused six different people multiple times of the same issue. And he had basically said, this person's a never resident. This person's a never resident, but he listed them twice for the same protest category. And for one Orange County voter, he even listed that person three times.
Where did he
Uh,
get these people's names? Did he ask the state for every single vote?
he asked the state and county boards of elections to hand over data, some of which the state board did, some
Mm.
of which these counties did. And so what happened as a result is there's this analyst named Ryan Bonifay with Coldspar. He uh, goes through this list, tries to identify these problematic people, and that is the impetus and origin of how these people get on this list. Is the Griffin
Some guy.
campaign checks with the state board of elections. The North Carolina Republican Party hires this consultant, and that person uses that list to make some assertions that, in some cases, are true, but in many cases also aren't.
And the court just said, okay, yeah, sure. These people, we're not going to check.
Essentially, there was no evidentiary hearing. There was no ability for reviews for these never residents. It's worth noting these military overseas photo ID people will have that opportunity to
Right.
prove they are who they say they are and have their photo ID. But it's I think the main thing to say is, as it relates to never residents, there are service members in Camp Lejeune. There are service members in Fort Bragg. There is a former D1 college athlete. There's an aspiring actress. There are people who've never lived abroad and just did a study abroad program for a few months, and that's how they got on this list. So these are Republicans, Democrats, unaffiliated voters from a wide swath of backgrounds who have no idea they're on this list and now have no opportunity to correct it unless the Fourth Circuit steps in.
That's two points. One of them, who you got to get a ballot too, right? You got to get an absentee ballot to vote in this. Like, just logically, who's going to fake residents? Use a whatever uh, scheme their way to a North Carolina absentee ballot if they're living overseas. Like the idea that like someone is going to uh, go through all that so that they can like spoil North Carolina elections is so funny to me. Because almost just give them props if they want to do that if they're really that dedicated to a single vote throwing off the North Carolina elections. But in addition to that, so you mentioned these are Republicans, these are Democrats, these are independents. You mentioned a number like 1,600 something. And so what number, where does that number come from? And where do you, like you said, that's the minimum number of people that are being challenged?
Yes, so there's 1,654 North Carolinians at minimum who are definitely in this challenge. That includes 260 never residents, and that includes 1,394 military and overseas voters from Guilford County who aren't otherwise in that never resident protest.
Okay.
So that is where the 1654 comes in. What is unclear from the Court of Appeals ruling is an additional 4,000 military overseas people from Buncombe, Forsyth, and Durham counties. So that is where you get that range of like 1654 to 5500 ish. That
Right.
is where that range comes in. And if it's the lower number, to overturn the election, Griffin will need 72.2% of those people to have voted for Riggs. And that's assuming none of them cure their ballots, all of them get tossed out, and
Right.
there's no drop off whatsoever, and all of them voted for Supreme Court race. So effectively, this race could be over in a few days if we get an interpretation from a state court that says that.
Why would they, want why would some military bases and some military people be challenged and some people be left out of it?
So for the never resident category, the people who would be in it would be the people who checked off that form and
Okay.
presumably checked off that form on their own incorrectly, or had that done on the back end incorrectly by some elections official. That seems to be the difference for these never residents. Now, as for these military overseas voters who didn't show photo ID, those people were more targeted by populous counties. So that is why Guilford County is on that list. The reason you don't see other counties is because those other counties didn't respond to Griffin's request in time for him to make that protest. Like there's a protest deadline that you have to get that protest in by. And so Griffin was waiting on these counties and didn't get responses from some and still hasn't gotten responses from some counties.
So them not doing their jobs actually has helped to some degree the
I mean,
voters.
them not providing data in a very urgent, timely way. It's also a
Yeah.
hard data request. It's like, hey, look at all these people in your
Right.
200,000 person county and try and sort through these applications who checked about like it's a lot of work too. And these people only had like days to weeks to do that.
Right.
So it was always a difficult task.
And so some there's like you mentioned like four counties or so that may or may not be accepted by the fourth or challenged by the Fourth Circuit. What is why would they not be? What's the difference between them and the one that is going to be?
So there was a supplemental request Griffin had made after the protest deadline, and it's unclear from the Court of Appeals ruling whether the North Carolina Court of Appeals whether it narrowly applies to people Griffin protested in time, or whether it also covers people who Griffin got data from after filing his initial protest. So
Got it. Got it.
that is the open question.
I mean, I'm not a lawyer and certainly not a North Carolina legal expert, but it seems like they're sort of making it up as they go to some degree, but the campaign and different courts.
I
Like
mean,
they're
it's
trying to,
it's
yeah.
professional whack-a-mole for everybody right now, for reporters, for campaigns, for candidates. Like it took this reporter 5 months into an election for us to discover that these never residents have resided here. So I mean, the fact that there's just so much uncertainty, whack-a-mole, judicial posturing. There's just so much going on in this case that's just confusing. And I think what's happened is a lot of people saw this big, bright, shiny object of incomplete registration, 60,000 people, and forgot about all these other people who had stronger legal arguments against them potentially and was really going to be the crux of the case. So I think a lot of people just messed up on where they were focusing on most closely.
One thing you mentioned a bunch of times is that people didn't necessarily, well, they haven't been alerted, right? Like, especially the never voters. Like, there's all these people that now it's fewer, obviously much fewer than 60,000 people, but there's all these people who don't even know that their names on the list, right? It's not like the state's saying, "Hey, could you fix this?" It's like maybe they're now on a website. I think Allison Riggs has, but it's not as if like the state's saying, "Hey, cure your ballot. You have a chance to cure your ballot," but not ever like telling someone that they need to cure their ballot.
Yeah, I mean, what happened initially was every person on this Griffin protest, these 66,000 people, they got a postcard from Griffin in the mail. It
Okay.
took them to a QR code. So if someone was like, it looked kind of like a routine political mail or someone might just throw away.
Mhm.
And if you live overseas, I mean, you would have to rely on your parent taking a photo of it, showing you, sending it. Like, there would be steps for it to get to them. But the process would have been, oh, I got a postcard. It looks like I might be affected. Let me pull out my phone. Let me scan this QR code. Oh, it takes me to a website where there's 100 there's 100 counties listed on, and I got to click on my county. Oh, okay, I've clicked on my county. Next, let me try and look for my name. Oh, it's not really easily searchable, but I'll just read through all these lists of names and see if I'm on there. Oh, I am on there. Okay, like that
Right.
would have been the process for someone to know they're on this list. So these people were these people alerted? The state board of elections said that notice was insufficient.
Mhm.
The state courts said the notice was sufficient.
And so, I mean, it's interesting that like Griffin got to do it, not like the state itself. You think that maybe like an official piece of mail from the state would be, I'd be much more likely to look at it, especially if I'm like, he's targeting Democratic voters. Why would you scan your QR code from Jefferson Griffin if you get in the mail?
Yeah, I mean the other thought is, this is following state rules. They might be antiquated and different in some states, but essentially it's, if a candidate files a protest challenging a voter, that candidate has to inform that voter. And then elections officials might set up a hearing and work that out between the campaign and the voter to adjudicate that. So that's what we're at now is we are waiting on the North Carolina Court of Appeals to say, hey, State Board of Elections, here's who we meant applies to in our ruling. Now go reach out to them and give them 30 days. So the State Board of Elections will reach out to these people, but not the never residents. So
Okay.
the never residents not reached out to by all accounts as of now. Maybe that can change, but it's certainly a big hurdle families are facing.
And so the people that they will reach out to, up to 5,600 or so of them, and they're all overseas.
There are military and overseas folks. Like some
Okay.
folks might have studied abroad at the time of the election, and then they're back in the States. So, like, I talked to someone named Josiah Young. He's a Jackson County voter. He was listed as a never resident. And he was listed as a never resident because he was studying abroad in Spain at the time. Well, now, I mean, he's back in the US, he's back in DC at American University. So,
Okay.
in theory, what would happen is they would send that he doesn't get any notice, but if other people, if he was in the military overseas, he would. And so, in theory, the state board of elections would send a mailer to his home address, and that person who lives at that home address would then tell their son, daughter, or sibling or spouse, "Hey, I just got this notice in the mail."
And is it something that I know that there's a website also like Griffin's List, and like what is the Riggs campaign doing? Obviously, they're filing a lot of lawsuits, but how are they trying to contact these people? And what is their
There are lots of
what are they
people
doing?
now, especially after my story, trying to contact these people and get a hold of them. One, because now they want them on their lawsuit attached to it, so they need to reach out to these people. But I have had a spreadsheet of the outstanding people still in protest at Anderson Alert Substack. If people look through my articles, I make a publicly available database where it shows all the potential votes still in question, and you can search by protest category. So you can
Yeah.
see not just your name, but you can see why you're being challenged. And
Right.
that is a very helpful resource There's other websites, but they don't really sort it by protest
Okay.
category. So I really recommend the spreadsheet I've created.
Yeah, no, that's impressive. And so, it sounds, I don't know. I'm obviously not again in North Carolina. What is the public sentiment of this? Is it confused? Are people mad? Like, especially now that it's been a bunch of months, and I'm sure people are sick of it, or people. I don't know if the political tide has turned generally. Like, what's the opinion there?
I think if you ask an average everyday person, they think the election's over. I mean, it's been 5 months. Well, we hear vaguely this thing about a Supreme Court race. We don't follow it as much, and so I think the broader public's just generally unaware, and for understandable reason. By all accounts, any objective person who's not listening to you or me would think the election is over. There's nothing to talk about anymore. So I think that is an issue, but you know, when I've gone to these places in Greensboro, I knocked on 30 different households, and it was a very
Wow.
tough experience. I said, hey, you're on this list. I showed him the list. Uh, and these were parents, siblings, spouses of service members, veterans, people who are in college, and their initial reaction was confusion. They
Yeah.
were like, "How is my son or how is my loved one on this list? How did this happen?" And then the second question I get is just or the second thing I hear is frustration. They're mad that it's gotten to this point, and then the third thing I hear is, "What can I do about it?" And that's where the depressing thing comes in for me because the answer right now is I don't know. There's for some people there's zero remedy whatsoever. For other people it's maybe you'll have 30 days depending on a court case. There people want to do something. They want to fix a problem if there's a problem, but they don't have a tool available to them yet at least
Right.
to correct that. So it's just it's really depressing to hear some of these stories of folks who did nothing wrong, followed the election rules, and now they're seeing the most sacred right being stripped.
It's interesting because North Carolina has had a real up and down history, gerrymandering, voter suppression. The voter ID law got knocked down until they brought it back. Like, there's been a lot of controversy around just voting rights, and when I say controversy, there's been a lot of attempts to curb voting rights. And I don't know if there's been any political backlash to it. Obviously, Republicans, are now they control this. I guess the governor's race is almost just kind of its own thing because you can't really count that as part of the political mood. But do you feel like there's going to be people are sort of sick of this? Is there going to be any sort of backlash if this does end up like the election flipping? Like, how do you imagine people once they start to tune into it?
Well, we are seeing fallout and we are seeing legislative action already. And there was this sweeping bill last year called Senate Bill 382. It's a 130 plus page bill and it was aimed at Hurricane Helene relief.
Mm.
But only 11 pages actually dealt with the hurricane. The vast majority was power grabs, policy proposals, power shifts. And one of those provisions that has not gotten much attention is the cure period. So, what do I mean by that? Let's say you go to a polling place and oh shoot, you left your driver's license at home. You don't have your photo ID with you. Then you fill out a provisional ballot and you say, "Hey, I'm legit, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to show the county board of elections my ID and prove I am who I say I am. I promise to do that. My vote should count." And so after the election, they say, "Here's how many provisional ballots we have. We give these people about 10 days to fix that issue to come back into the elections." And at this time, Griffin had a nearly 10,000 vote lead, and it just kept getting eaten at, eaten at, eaten at, eaten at, eaten at, until the point where Riggs overtakes him. And that is the moment Republicans said, maybe 10 days is too long to give these
Right.
people. And so through this bill, they've shortened that window substantially. And so now there will not be a chance for these voters to cure their ballots, the week following the election. And so there's already legislative action that has happened that's going to impact future races because of this Supreme Court race. And I've asked Republican House Speaker Destin Hall, Republican Senate Leader Phil Berger, is there any Griffin related legislation down the pipes? They tell me they want to see how this court process plays out and how these issues work out before they step in. But by all accounts, there is an appetite, I think, to make photo ID very clearly applicable to every
Mhm.
voter. That is what I would probably put my bet on as being the likeliest outcome of this case.
Do you imagine voters are gonna be a voter backlash about all this?
Any attempt that makes voting harder in any way is going to get a lot of attention from these left leaning groups
Yeah.
and a lot of pushback to that. Is it going to reach the average everyday person? Probably not.
Yeah, it just seems like this like legitimacy of elections, and we're seeing this all over. It's not just North Carolina, but like legitimacy of elections being, challenged or kind of feeling like, well, the Supreme Court doesn't have to be listened to now, even though, and they were trying to overturn the election in 2020. It seems like this is just another sort of brick in the wall in terms of just kind of the tearing down of the election system.
Well, I mean, I can paraphrase from what the justices themselves have said. Supreme Court Justice Anita Earl, she's a Democrat. She called
Uh-huh.
this a bloodless coup. You had Richard Dietz worry about irreparable harm here and undermining the public's faith, and he's a Republican. So if the colleagues of the people who made this decision are concerned, so should average everyday people.
Yeah. So this is you probably the question you can't answer, but like, what do you think happens with prediction time? Where do you think this goes?
Well, what I'll say what is the I'm not going to make a prediction, but I'll say what the because I don't know what the federal court will do. I don't know what the Fourth
Sure.
Circuit will
Yeah.
do. I don't know what the Supreme Court does. If I had a crystal ball, I'd probably be making six figures as a lawyer. But what I will say, what I do know is what the data tells me, and what the data tells me is based on the North Carolina Court of Appeals ruling. It seems that they are applying to Guilford County voters, not Buncombe, Forsyth, Durham. That's what their ruling suggests. Maybe they
Okay.
clarify it in a different way. If it says what it suggests, we have 1,654 people. If that's the case, you can basically call the election for Riggs. It's over. She'll lose votes. She'll lose votes.
Sure.
She won't maintain her 734 vote lead. But Griffin would need uh, all these ballots to not count. He would need everybody to vote in the Supreme Court race. There's like a 4% drop off from president to Supreme Court. Not going to happen. And then you would also need 72.2% of these people to have voted for Riggs. That's probably not going to happen. So, statistically, the likeliest outcome is Riggs wins, but that's contingent on how the Court of Appeals can be
Yeah.
narrowly interpreted.
Do you think that Griffin will ever, like, accept it? If he does end up winning, like you said?
From my reporting, you know, it seems like Griffin is a proxy in a larger fight that's being had. There were, frankly, from people I've spoken to on the Republican side, people who felt caught with their pants down that when Riggs overtook him and had to show some muscle, had to show some fight. This is a legal effort that is being waged by the North Carolina Republican Party. Like Jefferson Griffin has a legal defense fund that two people contributed to. Uh, but there is a North Carolina Republican Party building fund. We won't know what that number is until July. That's where people are contributing to. So this is going through the state party. And Griffin is kind of, I don't want to say along for the ride because he is feeling this as well. But it's hard to say what Griffin's line of thinking is when he hasn't done interviews. He hasn't put many public statements out. He's not taking questions. And everything that's been done has been through the state Republican Party. So I think Griffin is someone who has gotten death threats. He is someone whose family has taken a very emotional toll from this. He had lost a child, a newborn child, a couple months ago. He is. And none of this should be wished upon him or anything
Yeah.
like that. There's so many things that are inexcusable. I think he has an appetite for all of the hate coming his way to end, and maybe he's tired of this going. But if there's a way to win and there's still a pathway, he'll take it.
And so this is I don't want to take you keep you too long, and they've got a lot on your plate, but this is, like you said, he's a proxy in a way. What is in your mind, the overall goal then? If that's like the Republicans want the seat in the court, but they already have a majority. There's probably something else possibly there as well.
I think what we know from before the election is Republicans filed a lawsuit against these incomplete registration people. And they're incomplete registration for a number of reasons. Maybe they're married and had a name change, a hyphenated last name. Maybe there's just a whole number of scenarios why these people are there. Maybe someone typed out their driver's license number and transposed a number, and because there's not an exact match, the cell is just erased from the State Board of Elections database. At the time, before the election, the state and national Republican Party said, we need these voters purged from the voter rolls because they don't have their registration information all there. And I think the thing that most frustrates Republicans is feeling like there is a state board of elections that's not properly implementing photo ID, that's not maintaining its databases. That is what they are fighting against. They want the state board of elections to proactively reach out to these people with missing data and get some clarity as to uh, just making sure their database is up to date. Republicans want photo ID applying to all voters. So there are some clear policy goals that this lawsuit seeks to address.
They would also probably be happy with not no responses, right? Like they also they can mean to them if they don't get didn't fill in the database.
I mean, I think there is from people I've spoken to, this is a state board of elections that in 2020, when implementing COVID pandemic era laws, uh, adjusted rules for mail-in voting, did some things to make voting
Mhm.
more accessible that Republicans haven't forgotten about, still hold a grudge with.
They try to take it over, right?
Yeah, yeah, and
Legislature, yeah.
right now, uh, on May 1st, the state auditor, Republican Dave Bullock, he would take over the state board of elections. That's because of that bill I was talking about, SB 382 last
Right.
year. And there's an ongoing court fight over that. So Republicans want to take control of the state board of elections, strip the governor of his nomination stamp
Right.
of approval authority. And effectively, that would shift it from Democrat control to Republican control and align the Board of Elections with state lawmakers. So that is what is going on. And unless a district court intervenes, uh, Dave Bullock, the auditor, he would take over the Board of Elections administratively.
I remember when that happened. And it was sort of like, why would an auditor be involved in that? Because he was the one Republican statewide elected official, right?
Yeah, and it's worth noting there's other bills. The Senate just released a budget plan that creates the Dave Act, named after Dave Bullock, and it would be like Doge but state level, and
Oh god.
give him immense powers, but it would give him the ability to make recommendations to the state on which agencies or jobs should be shuttered. Uh, so they are really emboldening him. Interestingly, that bill, that portion of the budget, it would expire on December 31st, 2028, or December 30th, 2028, which is the last day he's in office if he doesn't win re-election.
Oh man, they better hope that this guy stays on their side.
He interestingly enough, I think he was a former Democrat.
Interesting.
At one point, and then Phil Berger, that's the Senate leader. Uh, he became close with Bola because there's some UNC ties, UNC Chapel Hill ties,
Yeah.
and Berger supported Bullock's primary and got Bullock over the finish line when he almost was on track to lose. So there is a strong loyalty and allegiance between Bullock and Berger.
That is wild. That is North Carolina is wild. I gotta say. I'm a New Yorker, and we've got our own wild politics, judging by our mayor and our past governors, and who's running in charge of things. But as a single party state, just the way things have happened and played out in North Carolina over the last decade or so. It's there may not be any other more interesting politically state.
Yeah, and right now you have a Democratic governor, Josh Stein, and Republicans are one House seat shy of a supermajority. So there is a little bit of a different environment now where to enact whatever they want, they need the governor's approval.
Yeah,
They need one crossover Democrat or just two Democrats to be walked off the floor when a vote is called. So
yeah, and they
it's not
had
as easy
converted
as it was
someone,
before.
and they had converted someone as well, right? They had they had the Democrat jumped over the last year as well, right?
Trisha Cotham, she
Yeah.
switched parties and gave Republicans a supermajority because of that.
But, a lot of infighting and just a lot of backstabbing and all that sorts of crazy stuff going on there. So I'm gonna open it up, if it's okay, just like a minute of questions people want to clarify. And Brian is a very scrupulous reporter. He probably won't satisfy your partisan people's partisan demands, but this is the moment to ask the guy who knows really what's going on and is like a real expert on what's been happening. And so, if you guys have questions, this is the moment to ask. People have been. I saw people asking throughout, asked about like the fourth circuit, and that's the federal court, right?
Yeah, there's the federal Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Mhm.
That what I have said since January is what this case will come down to is the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals interpretation of military overseas photo ID, and if they side with Riggs, it's pretty much game over.
And Anna wants to know if they get the three same judges in the Fourth Circuit.
Yeah, I have to double check on that process. What I know is that it's been appealed to the Fourth Circuit. I would assume it would be the same panel that has already kind of heard disputes thus far, but I'm not 100% certain on that.
And so, when is this? This will be my last question. When does this end? When do you think? I mean, this has been going on for so long, and there's a state to run and legislation to pass. After they haven't done it at all, they still think the budget passed. But like, when is this gonna end?
It can be anywhere from a couple of days to a few months.
Oh my
And
god.
the scenario where it's a couple of days is if the Court of Appeals says it applies to 1654 voters, it's game over for Griffin. Like you don't, regardless of what happens in federal court, the math isn't there.
Got
People
it.
call races with even less scenarios than that. Like it's over for Griffin if it's 1654. Where Griffin's hope is if it's a higher number, this drags out longer, and we have to wait and see what the 30-day cure period returns are. So we'll be here for anywhere from a couple of days to a few months.
Man, you must be ready to move on to another story.
No, I think where I'm what's important to me is that people understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And I have had a tremendous response, readership because of this story. And I think the important thing that gets missed is there are people behind these numbers. Every 1650, all these numbers just sound so abstract. But when you go on the ground, when you talk to people for the first time who don't know they're on this, there's an important public service to be had. I don't care if someone voted for Griffin or Riggs. I don't care what their party affiliation is. I'm sure listeners might. I care that people know what's happening, have the ability to know whether they're on this list, and know what to do if something's wrong. That is
Right.
what I think more people need to focus on, more people need to do. Talk to these voters, hear their stories, and then from there, I challenge you to say they deserve no hearing. You
Yeah,
can't
if
do it.
we had more people and more people in the state knocking on doors where you are, then I think it's been said a long time ago.
I've privately heard that from folks as well. Of why you have all these well-paid party officials and attorneys, and nobody thought to knock on these doors until this reporter did.
Yeah.
But I'm sad that it took as long as it did for me to comb through this list. Like I'm happy that it's come out that there are these never residents, but I am a little sad and embarrassed and
Embarrassed.
yeah, ashamed at myself for not catching this sooner. Where you want to tell everything in real time. I've had this database since January 15th, but I'm glad it's being told now, and these voices are being heard before it's too late.
I think you can go easy on yourself. I would say that you're I
I'll
wouldn't I
never
wouldn't feel
be
too bad,
happy
but
with myself,
that's
Jordan. I'll
fair.
never be happy.
We have that in common. I think it's part of a reporter thing. All right. So how can people find your reporting? Because this is ongoing, as you said. So where do people find you?
Anderson Alert Substack. I also work for the Assembly NC.com. That's where people can find more in depth pieces. But really, uh, I was in TV news and I was subject to a non compete for a year. And I thought when I created Anderson Alerts, it would just be this temporary thing to hold me over.
Mhm.
But the people have helped sustain this, so I've been able to keep it going. I'm currently funded on it through another month or so at least. So please support Anderson Alerts if you
Yeah.
value this type of journalism.
I mean, this is so important. I mean, there's, so the biggest Substacks, and I work for a union, so a lot of my like, gumshoe reporting is, and shoe reporting is done there, and still trying to do as much as I can on this newsletter. But a lot of Substack is just opinions, and I think that, like, which is helpful, and I write my write my opinions, but I think that the sort of stuff you're doing is actually changing the news, not just opining on it. So yeah, if you can do it, please go buy a subscription to Anderson Alerts, and follow him on Twitter, and he will keep you updated on all things happening in the crazy state of North Carolina.
Sounds good. Thank you for
All right.
having me, Jordan. You do great work as well. I told you offline I'm a big fan of some of it, and I just really appreciate you having me on to amplify these stories that aren't often being told nationally.
Yeah, no, I think, as there's so much insane thing, so many crazy things happening nationally that, like, it gets overlooked, I think. And what could be more important than people's actual voting, their votes actually counting? There's it's really important. So thank you for doing it. And yeah, that'll be it for tonight. But again, go follow Brian, and you will be fully updated on everything happening. Thanks, everyone.